Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the tier list for the World Championships. These are going to be discussing the best decks in the game and some outsider picks that I think might have interesting meta placement for the tournament. I've also done a percentage of how much play I think these decks will get in the day one field. My only caveat to this, if you are attending the World Championships, you're probably as good or more likely better than me at the game, and you've probably put way more hours into whatever you're thinking of playing for the tournament, and that's always going to trump the, oh, he said something was X instead of B tier that I expected, so now I have to completely change my choice. I hope that this is going to be entertaining and a good thing to look back on, maybe funny, who knows, and also maybe give you some insight into last-minute tech decisions rather than completely scrapping your deck choice because I said it was bad for the tournament, that sort of thing. Before we talk about the tiers, let's quickly look back at the NAIC representation of decks, because I do think this is quite interesting to look at, where Raging Bolt was the most played, followed by Grimmsnarl, the new archetype at the time, then Gardevoir, which of course had the eventual, both finalists and of course winning the tournament was that choice. And there was the sort of question mark of could it compete with Grimmsnarl now being a new threat, followed by Joltic Box at 9%, Dragadusk at 6.7%, and Dragazard at 6.5%, with Straight Pulse being a lot less popular, thinking that it wasn't really that strong into a Guardian Grim field post, the final few regionals of the season. But of course, it got the big top 4 placement from Tord Reklev, so we might see a redistribution of the Draga builds that we're going to discuss. I think typically seeing the elevated counts of Raging Bolt and Joltik come towards a wider field of players compared to the most dedicated player base at the World Championships, where typically they can turn their hand to any deck rather than sticking with a more straightforward strategy. There's nothing wrong with these archetypes by any means, and I actually think a couple of them are well placed for the tournament, but I think more generally we see elevated counts of these archetypes, even if they're not necessarily the best play for any given tournament, just by their ease to pick up and play, especially for the NAIC, which is like the largest tournament of the year, right? So there's more players who are more on the casual side of things and decide to go to 1 or 2 tournaments of the year and say, hey, why not? It's the NAIC. Also, a very quick look at last year's World Championships, where we know, of course, Iron Thorns was the eventual winner. It was a deck I touted to win the event if you watched the World's pre-show back in 2024, but a lot of players knew about the Iron Thorns EX deck as well, and it was actually a day 1 pick in the meta share as a 5.5%er. So when we're talking about the Crustles and the Typhlosions and these sorts of out-of-the-box picks that are sort of sitting outside of the meta looking inwards, I think players are willing to take a risk for the World Championships, knowing that sometimes the best way to beat the best players in the world is high roll your matchups or choose a high roll strategy as well. And ultimately it worked last year, so that might give people even more confidence to take a deck that may look odd on the outside but just have good matchups going in. And I think something like Crustle would be in that sort of realm this season. So just wanted to give a nod to the fact that even the top most engaged players are willing to take massive risks for the World Championships, simply because it can give them upside into beating basically anyone if they just decide to hit the right matchups and can metagame correctly. I know I'm talking about a bunch of data and we'll be getting to the tier list very shortly, but did just want to run down the popularity in the online scene just to see how things are going. Of course, this isn't really a true indication of what the best players are bringing, but I'm sure there are a number of engaged players who are taking to the online scene just to get some extra reps in. Golden Go has been the most popular deck, has been basically from the start of this expansion, and still retains a pretty decent win rate. Then Grimmsnarl, then Dragadustoir, which has shot up above the Dragazard that was kind of closer earlier on in the NAIC. And in fact, the Dragazard has dipped so much that the Straight Pult is up there. Guardy's still quite popular in that top 4. Raging Bolt, Ethan's Typhlosion really popular online. Charizard Pidgeot's been picking up as well. We, of course, had encouragement at the NAIC from the seniors division, and it doesn't need much encouragement for people to pick up Charizard again, just because it has been a big performer in the past. Joltic Box in there, Flareon, Crustle as well at that 13th place. This is the big question mark, I think, of this year, is like, do we actually care about Crustle? How likely is it that I can completely dodge it throughout the entire tournament? Or is it just going to have a clean run because no one can be bothered to commit the space, with so few decks actually having an inherently good matchup without teching for it? So Crustle is that big question mark, I think, that we still have to bear in mind heading into the tournament. Now, with all that said, let's get on to the tier list then, and we start off with the new contender in Golden Go. I'm going to put this as an A tier play. I think inherently the deck is S tier in terms of like power level, but I think everyone knows that. It's been the most popular online the last few weeks, and I feel like everyone's tried it, everyone knows what it's all about, and some of the other archetypes in the game are starting to take note and make changes. That doesn't make Golden Go a terrible play though, because I still think it's solid into Grim, still think it's solid into Guardy. I think it's okay into Dragapult, kind of even for the most part. It's happy into Raging Bolt. Like, some of the best decks, the high tier stuff, I think it's like really good into. It's just when you start seeing the tech inclusions of like Chi-Yu into regular Zard or Dragazard, you start seeing Joltic Box turn up now because Pikachu can just blow through you. You start seeing those Cornerstone, Mask, Ogerpon, the Crustle, the Ethan's Typhlosion, these sorts of things just start biting away at the win percentage of Dengo. I could definitely still see it winning the tournament if it just hits the top tier, but I do think there'll be a lot of Dengo falling at the wayside because it's been teched against one too many times. Slightly above Golden Go, I'm going to have Grimmsnarl. I think Grimmsnarl's decent into all of the Draga builds as well as Gardevoir, and that's a big boast, being sort of the best stage 2 among the lot, into the sort of trifecta of like how I want to be manipulating damage and all this other stuff. I also think Maractus got easier to tech with the Air Balloon as well. My one caveat with Grimmsnarl, similar to Dengo, is that it's also like relatively easy to counter. We've seen more picnic baskets sneaking into lists, we've seen more Turo scenarios, more switching effects generally, with an awareness of Maractus being not only in Grim but also in Straight Pult. So I think you're not really going to catch people napping in that regard. If they're facing this matchup, they're expecting the Maractus to come out, and will be holding back on these tech cards, so they still have a way around it once or even twice during the game. I am expecting Grimmsnarl to be the joint most popular archetype at the World Championships though, and I also could easily see this winning the event. My only S tier pick is going to be Dragapult Dustoir. I think this has the potential to beat everything and is really flexible in its game plans with how you can manipulate the damage with Curse Blast. Clearly Gardevoir is like your headache matchup, and it feels like time and time again we've under-respected Guardy, and it's been something challenging the Dragadusk and basically Dragapult builds in general, but I genuinely do think that Gardevoir will be sub 10% at the tournament. The one caveat to that will be those who are bringing the Gardevoir are probably the players who have made it very far into tournaments before, so you are going to have to face a number of Gardevoir players. The Dustoir does give you some chance, but I still think you're relatively unfavoured in that matchup. That's the only thing that I feel uncomfortable playing against as Dragadusk. And even then you have the high roll potential, where sometimes you can Budu, slow down the Guardy, then instantly go into Curse Blasting, knock out double Rolts, and suddenly you have an unsurmountable board state. I am putting Gardevoir quite low, actually. Still in A tier, of course. We have to respect the archetype, no doubt. But I think with Grimmsnarl and Dengo both also being top choices and probably popular, whilst also having to compete with mirror matches and whatnot, I feel like this is, you know, one of the hardest decks to play properly, and still has to navigate some really tough matchups, and also sort of gets caught in that crossfire of more and more archetypes playing those picnic baskets, Charizard Pidgeot somehow making it back into the fold. There's just more awkward matchups for Gardevoir, with Golden Go being quite a tough one as well. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Dengo was playing both Scrapper and Picnic heading into this tournament with double Turo. Like, I feel like they have the space to beat Gardevoir, and if they want to, they will. So I think that's a real challenge for this archetype. That said, it's still very powerful. It can still manipulate a prize trade, still one of the best Iono decks in the game. Still has the flexibility of going towards a Jelly build if it wants to have the Bravery Charm basic stuff. If you want to go heavy monkey, that's still a possibility. Gardevoir is still really powerful in a vacuum. I just think it's a volatile field for the deck. And even though a lot of people are touting this deck to be sub 10% in play, they still don't want to lose to Gardevoir, because those who are very competent at making the right build with Gardevoir probably are still going far in the tournament. I've constantly been putting Raging Bolt into like lower tiers than its results have shown over the last few months, and I still think it's going to be a tough tournament for the deck. I think you lose some percentage points into Dragapult with Hilda grabbing Neo Upper more consistently, and I also think it's really easy to lose the Golden Go matchup. The deck also gets randomly griefed by Golden Go being in the meta now, because Chi-Yu is popping up in all the Zard builds that can also give them a nice 1-for-2 trade. I think Raging Bolt also just having a bad Gardevoir is an easy thing to put a lot of players off. I still think it's going to be relatively popular though, just because it has such a core fan base and is a fast deck at the World Championships. That's one of the only things that I'm still thinking makes it a reasonable choice, just because you get to play a best of 3 with the deck every time. And it does have, I think, higher consistency than at least the Grim and the Guardy. Probably not as consistent as Dragapult, definitely less consistent than Dengo, but generally you're getting into most games. It feels weird rating a Tord list low, especially when it gains Hilda in this format, making it a better deck in a vacuum. But I think the Straight Pult had a few tricks up its sleeve at the NAIC, and Tord was catching players out with Maractus, Whereas now that secret's out the bag, and you almost always see players appropriately teching around it. I also think, like I've said before, Picnic Basket showing up, Turo showing up, and of course the ever-looming presence of Gardevoir is just an issue for you overall. Yeah, I think Straight Pult is a difficult choice. I think the only thing I'm holding out for is if there's going to be an Ace Nullifier Genesect Arven Evo build of Straight Pult. I think that might have some legs because it actually can rebalance the Dengo matchup. I still haven't seen much of this deck online, but I still have played it myself and still feel like I have a pretty reasonable list. So I'd love to see a reimagining of Dragapult now going Ace Nullifier rather than Maractus, or even having the two, because you can knock out the Prime Catcher as one of your opponent's outs. I think that's the only thing interesting me about a Straight Pult, but overall I think it's a little bit less high roll than the other builds of Dragapult, and I actually like high rolling at the World Championships, because you actually have to do that to win a lot of the matchups against the best players in the game. Ethan's Typhlosion is next. I'm putting this as a C tier pick. Like, sure, you can run into a bunch of the big basics in Dengo, but I think that you're just going to hit way too many of the stage 2 archetypes, and those are basically all bad for you. It does keep a few things in check, but I don't think a pure Ethan's deck is going to be the way to go. Haven't seen much discussion on an Ethan's Dragapult. That kind of fell by the wayside at the start of Destined Rivals. I don't think that's terrible, though, especially when it gains Bangle, and can also be like an Arven deck. So maybe we see some fireworks from Typhlosion, but maybe alongside Dragapult, rather than just playing it as its own deck. A lot of players are rating Dragazard like quite low, but I actually do like its matchup spread. It feels like the Lost Zone Giratina of the format in that it takes like the most 50-50s. You do have a slightly negative Grim and slightly negative into Dragadusk, which are two of the best decks in the room. But I think you cover such a wide field generally, and it does feel like it's going to be a wide meta, where I'm discussing, easily over 12 decks today. Yeah, there's been a lot of hate around Dragazard. Maybe its consistency is still holding it back a bit. Maybe I have to put it behind the Dengo, actually. And it is bad into two of the best decks, I think, in the room. But I think it's not so bad that they're, like, unwinnable by any means. And who knows, maybe sticking in a Picnic in your own deck could be a decent option. Charizard Pidgeot I'm putting towards the top of the A tier. I still think it is rough into some of these spread matchups similar to a Dragazard. But you are really good into Raging Bot and Dengo, which is a nice upside. And just playing Briar in your deck and having access to Quick Search means I think you beat a bunch of stuff that you have no business winning. I think my real surprise of the tournament is going to be Joltic Box. I'm expecting a little bit less Raging Bolts, definitely the lowest we've seen it for a number of tournaments. And I think that does open the door for this archetype to be pretty strong. I feel like with Power Glass it's really good into Dengo. Its type coverage makes it really dangerous into Draga and Grim. Guardies is pretty balanced, but again, you can tech for it with things like Vitality Band. Yeah, I just think it's a good time to be playing Joltic. It's, again, one of the few boxes that can tick being fast, scooping the game when you have to, and always keeping your opponent honest. With such a wide field, players are always trying to tweak their list to add an extra tech card for this or that matchup. And we might be getting to the point in the metagame where decks are so greedy that they don't get into games enough and simply respect Iron Hands. I think Flareon's my final A-tier play. Quite a wide A-tier in fairness, but I do think this is a really solid choice. Gardevoir's tough, but there have been a number of Japanese builds that are playing the Wellspring Ogerpon, and I do think that can give you cheese opportunity. With so few Guardies playing Buddy Poffin, you can often take out their lone rolts, and it also gives you late game win con into their Monkey Dories. Of course, Flareon is almost always playing the Grav Mountain as well, so you do have reach into the Guardy when you need to. This deck, of course, farms the Dengo matchup. It has the type coverage with Leafeon into Grimmsnarl. Leafeon's also really good into Dragapult as well. Even if you're not taking clean KOs, you're healing so much of the damage. Yeah, I think Flareon is a really good Noctowl deck right now. Actually, probably the best Noctowl deck we have in the game, above the Raging Bolt. I am poking Crustle into the B tier. It has a couple tough matchups. Like, I think Dragadusk and Guardy are rough, and that's enough for me to keep it as a B tier play. But there's nothing holding back if your opponent isn't fully capable of dealing with it. I hope that the players at the World Championships either choose to pay respects to the deck or choose to play the matchup enough to squeak out percentage points to at least take points off them, stopping them having clear wins. It does have like 60s and 70% in the win rates of these matchups. When you just set up 2 Crustle and start shaking your opponent's hand, that is appealing. So if you're the player who's unprepared for the World Championships, or if you were in the bottom 125 of your region, you're still definitely a skilled player, but by statistics, there's like hundreds of better players than you at the event. So giving yourself that opportunity to beat the very best in the game simply by them not respecting your deck is quite valuable, I think. That's my main discussion on what I think will be the main threats, but I have filled out the rest of the graph here as well. The highest tier stuff that I also shoved into sort of the back end of B tier. And Zoroark, I think you can be reasonable into Dengo if you play double reversal Hilda Darmanitan. And I think it's really valuable to move away from the Cyrano build and go back to Arven Evo. At the same time, we know that just sort of staying on even prize cards against the stage 2s can be a real headache. They can walk into the pitfall of Reshiram counter KO, or you just having Turo when need be. I do think the Zoroark is pretty reasonable. It just has to spread itself quite thin with such a wide matchup spread. And with more Charizard upticking, there's more reason for people to like the grass tech Pokemon, like the Iron Leaves coming into Joltik, Raging Bolts, even the Flareon deck being picked up a little bit more. I think that does catch Zoroark in the crossfire a little bit. Terrabox I tried a little bit this week actually, and I did do a tweet about it being like a under-respected archetype, and I think there's a lot of reasons to like the idea, but generally I think if you shove a Wellspring into Flareon, it's probably just the superior deck. I don't know, Pikachu EX is quite good right now and can checkmate the Gondgo, but Flareon does it in a very similar way. So I think Terrabox is still slightly inferior to the EVs, although Flareon is the clunkier of the two, so bit of a trade-off. I wouldn't be surprised if Terrabox made a top 16 run, because we know it has that pedigree. But I also don't think there's been many people who are believing in the deck, because it's been a couple months since it's seen too much success. Rounding out the C tier, we have Miraidon. I think it's essentially inferior to Joltik Box if you're trying to play a build. However, I do like a 2-2 Magnet and just have hands and double Zekrom. I feel like that does create a lot of situations where you can win in 3 attacks after just powering up your first dude, and every now and then you hire all the generators and get it going. I just think its reliability is so much less than it used to be when it had Secret Box and access to Arven Forest. Just having to rip research, and sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't, playing the full 16 energy, still not having double turbo. These things do take away your percentage, to be honest. So I think it's just worse than Joltik. Similar for Guardian Jellicent, like yes, it's a Gardevoir deck, so it's never going to be that bad, but I do think that Jelly isn't necessarily the vibe. Devolution is definitely going to be a powerful strat heading into the World Championships. Just look at how many of the decks I'm looking at evolve here. But I think this does take away consistency from Gardevoir, and it's already quite a greedy deck, so I don't want to make those 4 slots plus the Devo to really make it happen, compared to just playing, 1 or 2 Bravery Charm and the basic chaps. Then we do have the D tier. I think Garchomp is just worse than the other stage 2s, and there's Devo hate going on right now in Grimmsnarl, sometimes Guardy as well. There's just more reason to not like the Garchomp, I think. There's also Tool Scrapper sneaking into decks that also really hurts your win rates, and there's grass stuff around. Like, yeah, I think Garchomp had a bit of a highlight at the NAIC, nothing too crazy. And that was even with some of the very best players piloting it, so I don't expect much from this deck. Charizard Dusknoir is less reliable than Dragadusk, and less reliable than Charizard Pidgeot. Like, if you really want to in Charizard, you can play a 1-1 Dusclops, but I don't think the trolley nonsense is going to get you very far at Worlds. Ceruledge, Clunky Pile, yeah, not great there. It is Fire Guy though, so if you expect like 18% Dengo, sure, why not? Pidgeot Control does gain some cool new tools with Alamomola and a few new strong basics like Cubchoo and Elgyem, but I think it's still a tough time to be Pidgeot right now. Again, lots of Devo shenanigans, lots of bench manipulation, all this stuff is a problem. Especially when so many decks are naturally trying to counter corner because of the high tier stuff playing it. That also can be annoying for Pidgeot. Everyone forgets that Roaring Moon got second at the World Championships last year, but yep, it did, and it still is possible to be an aggressive archetype that has the poison package. You can definitely yoink some prizes early and still deny that Pheasantipity. That's still one of the things that has going for it. So you're consistent, you're imposing your strategy, I just don't think that strategy is necessarily that powerful. Hoa Armrouge, Clunky Pile. I think you're better playing the Owl toolboxes. And then we end on Toedscruel. As soon as Sizzle came into Toedscruel, it made the Dengo matchup bad and not good. And I think that was one of the only things sort of propping up its win rate in the first place. There's also more like Chi-Yu around right now. You just get caught in a bunch of crossfires with Dengo having that fire weakness. I don't even think Ray's going to be playing Toedscruel at the tournament, so I've given it the 0% play. So there you go, that's my tier list. I have been like quite top heavy here with a lot of options, to be honest. But it does feel like we're in a wide format. I think my most contentious choices are Joltik and Dragazard being so high. And maybe I should have thrown more of these decks down into C tier, like maybe I'm a dreamer for Terrabox, N, and Crustle. But that's how I see the meta, that's how I see decks shaping up right now in terms of lists. Let me know your thoughts on the meta percentages. I've done an 88% total right now, which is quite a high sum, but there are a lot of decks on this tier list. Let me know what you think is going to win the World Championships down below. By the time this video comes out, I think I'm already going to be on a plane on my way over to Anaheim. I'm commentating the tournament, of course, so make sure you tune into the official stream. We're going to endeavour to have the best players, the most interesting decks and matchups out there. I'm so excited for it. It's my second time commentating the World Championships since London, the first time I'm going out to the US to do it. And I think this is an excellent format to commentate because there's so many avenues back into games, so many intricacies in matchups. And I think Black Bolt White Flare gives us just enough to make this meta slightly different from the NAIC. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you soon for another one, probably when I come back from Worlds.